long time ago, my grandfather, Harry John Score, fired up my imagination and instilled in me a deep love for history with countless stories of his past. Now, I am a grandfather with stories of my own to share with my granddaughter, Hannah. Oh, and now, with the help of the World Wide Web, I can share them with you. Simple little tales of life from years and years ago. Robert Score, report to the principal's office immediately. In high school, that had to be the most frightening announcement any kid could ever get, particularly loudly over the PA system first thing in the morning in the middle of homeroom period. Talk about embarrassing. Here I was being called on the carpet for some unknown transgression to face the equivalent of being flogged or shot or both, which was bad enough in itself, but the entire student population had to hear it. That trip to the principal's office was the longest 5-minute walk of my first 18 years on Earth. To be clear, I was not a habitual classic case of a troublemaker. Yeah, I was living in a slightly different paradigm than most of my high school peers, but I was just an average American farm kid, although not the sharpest tool in the shed or the brightest bulb on the tree. Excuse the cliches. I was just trying to survive the second half of my teenage years, trying to deal with a 7-day-a-week job shoveling cow poo and reaching my third decade of life with a high school diploma and hopefully get myself into college. I was no high school sports hero, not exactly popular for anything. I was far from the top of my class. After all, one of my nicknames was Dumb Farmer. And now, just 2 weeks before graduation, suddenly everything seemed to be heading rapidly into the manure spreader of life. My mind was a war as I made that lonely walk down the halls to face my fate. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what crime I committed. I never got into a fight with anyone, never got into a pissing match with any teacher, never smoked in the boys' room, never flushed a lit M80 firecracker down the toilet. I had enough drama in my life. Had absolutely no reason to add any more. Well, there were a couple of things. First, there was English class. From elementary school on up through my junior year, English was one of my favorite subjects. In spite of the torture of grammar and diagramming sentences, I loved reading and writing, and my grades were consistently high. Not so in my senior year. Because the subject came easy to me, I didn't work at it as hard as I should, and I wasn't that serious in class. Thus, that particular teacher and I were not fans of each other. No matter how well I was doing in the rest of my subjects, if I failed English, I would not graduate. Maybe I was about to get the bad news. Or there was another problem. For most of my senior year, I was on the wrong side of school authority on one little issue that wasn't really my fault and was something completely out of my control. One of the perks of being a farm kid was the fact that I had a job, a farm job that I had to be at both before school and after school. That meant that once I got my driver's license, I could be allowed to drive to and from school. Now, here's where the rub came in. Each student that was allowed to drive to school and park in the school parking lot had to have a parking permit in the form of a parking sticker. Each student was issued one and only one sticker, and This is where I ran afoul of school law. You see, in my senior year, I did not have my own car. I actually did have one in my junior year, but due to some unfortunate events, totally not of my doing, during my senior year, I had to share a car with my brother Jim. And no, I'm not explaining that. It wasn't quite as bad as it seemed, because on the farm we had in total 4 roadworthy vehicles at my disposal. However, due to the changing needs of the farm and the needs of other family members, I did not always have the same vehicle to take to school every day. At least once a week, I had a stickerless vehicle parked in the school parking lot, and at least once a week during the morning announcements I would hear, "Would the driver of the vehicle with license plate so-and-so please report to the main office?" And at least once a week I would get the same scolding and have to explain the same extended circumstances. By the end of the school year, this little weekly occurrence was getting quite old and quite tedious to all the parties involved. Nervously and with some degree of panic, I began to ask myself, after weeks and weeks of warnings, is the hammer finally going to fall? Well, that's all I could think of. I was dead certain I had pissed off someone enough to bring my whatever wrongdoing to the attention to the highest dispenser of discipline in the building. As I knocked on the principal's door, I took a very deep breath, silently said to myself a Dutch Reformed version of a Hail Mary, and walked in to face my fate. As if this horrible happening wasn't already dreadful enough, apparently the situation was even more dire than I could imagine. Not only was the principal there, but also my chorus teacher and the superintendent of schools. All 3 staring at me with cold expressions that could freeze the sun. I could hear the manure spreader of life beginning to crank up. I was now facing a capital crime. Life was over. Well, doggone. I didn't know who it was, never saw him or her, but there was an angel on my shoulder. The cold stares were a ruse. I wasn't in trouble at all. All 3 broke into smiles, chuckles actually. Must have been a real rush to them, seeing a pale, sweating, trembling student about to have a coronary for nothing. Maybe I wasn't an A student in English, but I passed. The parking problem? Water under the bridge. Is that another cliche? Turns out this not-so-stellar farm kid student did excel at something. Being the over-imaginative oddball that I was good at theater. Starting in my sophomore year, I had 4 major roles in school stage productions. The last of which I had the leading role and had enough trust and respect from Don Romay, the chorus teacher and head of the music department, to ask me to write it. Yep, true story. You're going to look it up. I called it An Account of Ourselves, a collection of notable American songs woven around a dramatic exposition of American history. Basically, an ordinary farm kid's take on the American journey from way back when up to May 1968. First time in the history of Valley Central High School anything like that ever happened. Well, wouldn't you know? I was called into that office on that morning in mid-June 1968 to set in motion another first in that school's history. Something that still, to this day, has only happened once. A graduating student of Valley Central was invited to be the keynote speaker at his own graduation. Hey, not bad for a dumb farmer. And, oh yes, that was years and years ago.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to opening night of An Account of Ourselves. Tonight, the Valley Central Senior Mixed Chorus and I, Bob Score, are going to tell you a story. We're going to briefly and, as you might guess from my clothing, quite casually, an account of ourselves.